Yep, testing. All right, here we go. Well, thank you, and thank you all for coming out tonight. And now it's a hot night, and we'll get through this as soon as possible. And I put a title on this. The title is Oriental Rugs and Other Life Lessons. And I picked that because part of it I got from a message years ago that kind of always stuck with me, that how Oriental rugs work is we like looking at them, and they're real pretty, real expensive. And when we look at that, for all we know, we could be looking at a whole series of mistakes. Because what happens is every Oriental rug has a rug maker. He has a boss, and they have a pattern to look over. Now they go over the pattern, and the last thing the boss says to him, his worker, is, okay, you make a mistake, you stop, you call me, and you don't do anything till I get there. So he goes on, and he makes a mistake, and he calls his boss. His boss says, okay, wait a minute. His boss comes, looks over the mistake, and weaves the mistake back into the rug. And with a life, especially lives like ours, lives that have been led to Christ, those that are His, that's what God's redeeming work is like, because we make mistakes, we stumble, and He makes all things beautiful in His time. He really does. And we're going to see tonight how that worked out with my life, because there were many stumblings. But as we go on, one of the things I learned is, if you excuse me a moment, I've been trying to evict this frog from my throat since the worship, so. Human beings have three basic needs, three core needs: security, significance, and love. Security meaning that we like all things to, work out with us, and we like to know it's all going to be okay. Significance is that we know we matter, and love is a sense of validation that we all have a need to know that we're loved. And each one of these needs, I really believe, and I've come to know, that they're either going to be met in Christ or they won't be met anywhere else. Because it's His love that makes the other two needs in our lives what it should be. And it's His love that, without that being there, or without us having a firm foundation with that, we tend to look for the security and the significance in kind of illegitimate ways. Many an addiction is born like that. Ungodly lifestyles. We'll get into some more of that later. But the scripture is in Ephesians 2:10. We are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works. That means we are His masterpiece. So as we move along here, go to the next slide. This is not me. I had to borrow that picture. I was born here in Worcester, and I was actually born a month premature. I was 5 pounds 13 ounces when I was born, and 5'8" when I went home from the hospital. And look at me now. I had the two best parents that a guy could ever ask for. They were great. Growing up through the school years, I didn't get away with anything. But they were always there. They were loving. And my childhood years, although one of the first, earliest memories I remember, and I was probably still in Hanneman when I had this memory, is I was surrounded by a bunch of bottles, and I remember getting a shot in the rear end. So, aside from that, it was really good. until I went to school. Now, the top of that says I was the youngest, but yet I was the firstborn. That was because my brother and sister were adopted. They were my brother was 5 years ahead of me, and my sister was 6 years ahead of me. They would have been my cousins. And then I came along. When I went to school, in first grade, I was ushered into a whole different world where I found out how cruel other kids could be. I was bullied off and on till the 10th grade. And I was going into school, I think, as spanking was going out of school, because we remember a time, those of us who were old enough, where the teacher had the right to administer corporal punishment, which means that, you know, you do something you shouldn't do, you go up, hands out, palms up, and you get the ruler. Well, I got something a little more than a ruler sometimes in front of the whole class. And the teacher did not mince words. So my first experience was self-discovery, and my first experience with authority figures outside the house, not really that great. So it got a little easier when I got into 9th grade, because I started playing guitar, and some of the kids found out I could play, and so I could let up a little bit. So something good came out of that. It was hard to see right then that it was for a purpose, that none of the stuff in our lives happened by accident, and that the enemy of our souls, who all too often likes to take advantage of children that age, before he started working, he never stood a chance, because Jesus defeated him 2,000 years ago at Calvary. It's finished. Next slide, please. Well, I graduated high school and went to Berkeley. I lasted about 3.5 years or so there. For the first semester, I was away from home, and, you know, I was in high school. I tried to, you know, be good to please mom and dad, and, and the relatives and the in-laws and outlaws and everything. Try to please them. But when I got away from home, I wanted to let my horns grow a little bit. So I majored in performing and arranging and minored in partying. And I was drinking massive amounts of alcohol in those days. It was a couple times, probably lucky I didn't kill myself doing it. And during that first semester, I ran into a guy named Ray who was a Christian. Drummer from Philadelphia. And he's a great guy. I liked him straightway. Well, to make a long story short, after a night of partying, I was just knocking around the neighborhood, and I went into the Church of Scientology to sit down with somebody. They had a beachhead, if you will, over on Beacon Street in those days. And unbeknownst to me at the time, this guy was going down one of the side streets off of Boylston Street, and he'd never been down this street before, and he didn't know why he was going there initially. And he's like, I don't know why I'm going down here, I'll go a little further. He saw me coming out of the Church of Scientology. He's like, that's why I'm going down here. And that's when I had the gospel shared with me. It wasn't the first time, so my sister had shared before, and I prayed with her in front of Billy Graham when I was 13. But it was more of an emotional experience, I would have to say, because nothing really much changed outside of, you know, crying for a few minutes, and then that was it. But I was exposed to, I was brought up Roman Catholic, and I used to have a set of books that I read from. You know, I read looked at the pictures more than anything, but a lot of Bible stories. I like Noah and Elijah and Moses and all these guys. And so my mom and I were talking about Noah one day, and I'm like, wow, you mean there's going to be no more flood? No, there's not going to be any more flood. Oh, great. It's going to be fire next time. Whoa. So since then, I thought it was a really good idea that if this is where it was going to end up, I didn't want to be any part of that. And then my sister had shared with me a little bit later when she was sharing, I was exposed to that Jack Chick track, This Is Your Life, where the guy stands before God, and I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it scared the daylights out of me. So I had it ingrained in me there was a heaven and a hell, and it dawned on me during this time, look, dude, you're 18 years old, you're out here drinking. If anything happens to you tonight, it's not going to end well. So we fast forwarded to the place where I come back from the semester, and I was out with my roommates. We were down the street, and my plan for that night was actually getting slightly annihilated because I didn't have class till the afternoon, so I'm going to just go in there and we'll pick up with school tomorrow. I saw my friend Ray getting on a bus. I'm like, wow, what's happening? I'm kind of, I hope he doesn't know I'm drunk. I was pretty drunk at the time. And he's like, yeah, we were going to go to a meeting tonight. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll come. That was my first Pentecostal meeting. And being brought up Roman Catholic, I thought it was kind of cool, people are speaking out, and I heard someone prophesy for the first time. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. It beats having to sit there for an hour and what time is it? Quiet. What time is it? Quiet. Well, shortly after that, I bought a Jack Chick book, The Next Step for Growing Christians, because, I wanted to get started right, but there was this nagging uncertainty. So one night shortly after that, I had prayed, and I prayed the prayer at the end of the book, because, man, if there was any chance of me winding up in the other place, I wanted to make sure I wasn't going there. So that night I prayed, and as you can see in the opposite picture, that was when I came to faith. And there was some things that changed. I mean, the world looked like a new place. I didn't want to party anymore. I had my head into my schoolwork a little more for a season. And you might have thought that everything was all good after that. But here's the thing. There are two kinds of Christians I want to address tonight. There are the kinds of Christians that are like a pastor that I had one time, that from day one, moment one of his conversion, he never once had any insecurities about God's love for him, not once. Until that moment, until he went home, he was always secure. And then there are those who have to kind of go over it and renew their mind to it because of some things that had happened. And I was in the latter category. I had found a church that was about 10 or 15 miles away from myself, so I was excited, First home church, it's awesome. We're looking into the Word of God. And the pastor of that church had found out that I was going to music school. So he got me up with a worship team. I started singing. That was the first time I actually ever sang and played for anybody, which that first time I froze. Completely froze. Nothing came out, not one sound. One of those things. But we got through that, and then the next thing I know, I was being made the the leader of the worship team, which, as I see it now, I think there was a possibility that I was ushered into that too young, because I was like 5 months old in the Lord, and I'm leading a worship team. I mean, I should probably, as I look back on it, what I would like to have happened was being under a mentor, being mentored into the position over time, but I was just thrown into there. So basically we did the best we could with what we had. But there were things going on that I didn't understand yet with this particular church. And I'd gone there for 4 years. And at the end of that 4 years, the pastor of that church was caught in an affair with a secretary that was going on for about 2 years. Nobody knew anything. And the leadership busted him. You know, I saw the guy's car outside the house all hours, and, you know, they thought rightly something was going on. And, you know, and about a month after that, the church folded. So I'd gone to my next church. And this was, you know, this is where I met this pastor who was just secure in God's love, radiated in God's love. And I mean, he used to be worshiping, and I remember this guy during the worship, he had this little cubby that they preached from. He'd be dancing around all over the cubby, bouncing here, there, off the walls. And I love watching this guy. So I wound up in that worship team, and there was a dynamic there where there was a lot of single mothers and a lot of single guys. And, you know, the leadership tried pastoring through that the best they could because, well, to top it off, they were all kind of in the mid-20s, some were pushing the early 30s. And so a lot of people in a situation like that, they start thinking marriage. And there were a lot of marriages happen. And I was among them. This is where I had met Simon and Eugene's mother. Simon is Eugene's older brother. And, you know, I think the Lord brought it as far as he could, but there was just too many assumptions made going into that. Like, you know, well, we're Christians. I mean, I know this isn't right and that isn't right, but God's going to take care of everything, right? Yeah. I had ignored a few deal breakers, and I think she did too. And then 4 years later, which I had feelings of the bullying that I had experienced years ago brought on a root of rejection in my life. And it brought on social anxiety that I still wrestle with to this day. Getting the victory over it, because God is getting stronger and stronger within me. The enemy's getting weaker and weaker. Sometimes our trials are like that. But this is what I was dealing with. So I wasn't really the kind of guy that you would, you know, with some of the trials that marriage affords, I think you have to be a little bit further along than that. Because this is what breeds security in you, not that I've got it all together, or I've got $70,000 in the bank, or I've got this, or I got that. But the Lord puts that sense of love within us, that we have appreciation for who we are. And a lot of the most effective marriages happen where people don't need to be married. They get married because, you know, you have a whole person and a whole person, and you have the dynamic there of 1 × 1 = 1. One woman, one man, one flesh. Well, we lost sight of that, and we ended up divorcing, which brought out new levels of rejection. Because this is somebody now who I might add did not waste any time finding anybody. I ended up doing the same thing after that because we were away from the Lord. But the whole point being that in order for marriage to work, you have to have a whole person, a whole man, whole woman, and Jesus. That is your threefold cord that will never be broken. As the man in that marriage, I have and I had always taken accountability for what happened. Taken accountability for my life not being as right as it could be. because in the marriage, I have greater accountability. But we had Simon and Eugene in that. And if we go to the next slide. Back one, I think. And I'd been in and out of church over the years, during which time, because I did not have that sense of love rooted, grounded, and established within myself, I tried looking for relationships to satisfy that. And I had a history of trying to arrange things that ended up blowing up in my face as a result of that. And in one of those relationships, my daughter was born. And she's a beautiful girl. And I've got 3 beautiful children out of that I wouldn't trade for anything. And this is one of those things in the rug that God's weaved in for his redemptive purposes. Because he's made it that I've always had fairly good relationships with the mothers, by the grace of God. And I always had good relationships with the children. You know, and God did that. However, it was bringing me back to church, and the turning point for me was during the last relationship that I had tried to arrange after the one with which my daughter's mom failed. I had met someone, and about 3 months after that, it became very evident that I met the wrong person. So I came to myself, kind of like the prodigal did at that point. And I said, look, I may not have had the opportunity for relationships when I was in church, but I sure had a lot more stability then. I didn't have to worry about being like, you know, like having 1 foot in jail and 1 foot in the nut house, if you will. When I was in church, I didn't have to live like that anymore. So that's what brought me back the first time. But the root of rejection was still there. And so I'd come back and I went right into the wilderness. Because the wilderness is a place where we learn to trust God, where nothing about our lives looks like it's going to work the same way as we thought it would. I come back thinking, well, I'm going to come back with music, and, you know, I'll be up here, I'll minister, and, you know, I'll be there for the kids, and, you know, God's going to bring someone at length. This was like 1994, and I think for the next 15 years till 2009, the exact opposite stuff happened. And I literally ended up watching somebody live my dreams. And God was behind every single last step of it. I'm going to tell you why. Because one other thing that the wilderness does is humble us. And I needed humbling. I think to some extent we all do, but if everything had worked out the way I had envisioned it, God only knows what would have happened. It would have been like Pride City. You know, I can see that happening. In Isaiah 42:16, he says, I will lead the blind by a way they do not know. Now, it never occurred to me at that time that part of the reason for that is throwing the enemy off track. You know, when things happen unexpected and you find yourself moving in all these directions, well, sometimes he throws the enemy off track that way, but we don't see it at the time. During this time, my mother went in for a serious operation. And I called home to see how my dad was doing from work. And he says, well, things are all right here. Yeah, your brother came by the house. He said he got born again. I'm like, wow, okay. So I talked to him, and he mentioned a church called Triumphant Life over on Randolph Road. And so that's when I first went to Triumphant Life, because of him and his influence. And they used to have these meetings there where somebody was licensed as a Foursquare prophet used to come in, and there were like 3 or 4 churches came, and it was a great time. And we used to go to those meetings. And there was a lot of ground, because he was a part of the bullying that happened when I grew up, and we had a chance to, kind of mend some fences during that period. During the same period, I had another relationship that looked like we were going to be engaged that totally blew up in my face. And I was devastated. And he was going to get married. And he had this habit. I mean, I'd be doing worship at my other church, and I'd be driving home, and I'm thinking, all right, I hope I get this afternoon to myself. Because really, all I wanted to do, I just wanted to crawl under a rock someplace and feel bad for myself. I saw his car there. I knew it was going to happen. Set foot in the door. Tom, you want to do some praise songs? You're kidding, right? But I didn't know that was just the thing I needed. Sometimes the things we need come in packages that we don't expect. And during this time, backing up a little before that, there was a lot of prayer that went forth. There was my church praying, Triumphant Life was praying, and my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, their church was praying. We had prayer going up all over the whole state. And a surgery where the doctors were saying there was a 3% chance that she was going to make it through. She ended up pulling through. God's faithfulness, and also her Italian attitude. Because her attitude going in, it was like, okay, so if I don't have this, there's no chance. 3%, you're saying there's a chance. Let's go for it. And she did. And God was faithful. Well, one night she ended up going into the hospital to have her meds adjusted, and I got a phone call. And I thought, oh goodness, this is going to be her. It's the Auburn police detective, and he says, hi, do you have a brother named Dean? And I'm like, yes, I do. He passed away tonight about 6 o'clock. I'm like, whoa. It's like, since I turned 40, I'm going to be 55 years of age this September. In this part of my life, I've been to more funerals in that one part since I have my whole life combined. It kind of happens when you get older. And I stayed up all night. But what I remembered was that knowledge that he made it. He came to the Lord. He's in heaven right now. And I couldn't get over it. He's in heaven. He's in heaven. And really, this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about eternity. But the feelings of being less than and the root of rejection still continued. I never felt as good looking as others. I still don't sometimes. It's a daily walk. And this time I ended up getting myself in big trouble. Because during the time my mom was in for the surgery, a lady called me. And it was one of those conversations where I had to tell her, look, you're a married woman. This can't happen. Ever. But this is why we have to be sober and vigilant, because the enemy doesn't, when you take a stand like that the first time, he doesn't just say, all right, Okay, he took a stand. Have a nice life, buddy. I'm out of here. Nah, he's waiting. So after that engagement thing, where that failed, and I was in that state of affairs, he sprung that on me again, and I went for it. Fast forward to first week in October of 1999 it was. We were approached by the pastor and the head elder to sit down in the office for a talk. And somehow I knew that he was not going to congratulate us for our intentions. We're in trouble. I had to step down for a season, but I thank God every day that because of a godly leadership and a family and a worship team that stood with me, that God brought me through that period of my life. And then I'm here today, and I thank God every day for that. Because one of the enemy's biggest strongholds is wrong relationships. And for all your knowing, the one thing that you have to know is that God never, under any circumstances, ends one marriage for the purpose of beginning another marriage. It just doesn't happen, ever. And it was something that could have serious consequences. But this pastor that I told you about, he also operated in the prophetic. And when he talked to me, he came at me with, and you can look these scriptures up in your own time, Proverbs 1, verses 20 through 33, Proverbs chapter 5, Proverbs chapter 6, Hebrews chapter 10, verses 26 through 31, which is a heavy one. And I knew beyond any shadow of doubt that the smartest thing that I could do in that situation is to heed his word as soon as humanly possible, if not sooner, and do something about it. And it flashed in front of my mind, you know, I do worship. I mean, I share worship leading responsibilities here, and I am accountable for these people. I left that office, and I got right on the phone to her. I says, we can't do this anymore. And that night I broke it off. And since then, it was 16 years ago, and I have never since then pursued a relationship. Trying to put first things first. It was hard. And, you know, it's not easy, but it was the best thing. Because I needed to be that good example for people. And I could sense the responsibility that was on me. So after that, the pastor at this church, and this is one of those faith stories that make you go, He hadn't been well recently, which was kind of a red flag to me because this guy had an impeccable lifestyle. I mean, he was healthy as a horse, never sick a day in his life. Those who knew him well knew that he never took so much as took an aspirin. Never had to. He was just healthy. Well, there was something that you know, was going on, and I was going to stay away from church that morning. God was speaking in my heart, nah, you go to church. I said, do I have to? I really wanted to go fishing. You're going to church. All right. So I went out of obedience. And that's when they handed down the diagnosis. And 7 months later, in spite of our prayers, in spite of the faith we were exercising, he went home. And after that, the church operated, by 3 elders, and we were looking at guys to be pastors. So the pastor who was pastoring the Foursquare Church over here in Randolph Road was back in the area, and his name came up, and I knew him. I said, get him in here. this guy's great. And so he came in, and then he was, him and his wife were there for about a year and a half, 2 years, after which time they brought 2 other people in, and they became pastors, and that church became Foursquare also, which is how I was introduced to the Foursquare family. And I always respected them because they were pretty sound doctrinally, and I love the covering they were under because there's always accountability towards somebody. But I'd gotten away for a brief period again because security in God's love wasn't there. And I think that with young converts, if you ever lead someone to the Lord, you need to make that the first and foremost thing, that you have to be secure in God's love. Because if you're not, you're really not going anywhere. I got a wake-up call that I didn't expect. About 2011, my son Eugene came back to faith again. And I thought, wow. And it was right about that time that I felt this finger right in the middle of my back. You have a vested responsibility to encourage this young man in his faith. You know what you got to do. And here we are. And since that time, I saw the Lord do things with me that I never dreamed possible. I used to come here and sit in the back. I was happy. I used to come to Baystate, pretty much do the same thing. One night when I was at Baystate, there was a couple who was at my old church that talked to Pastor Dave, who was, he was running that at the time. And they told them about some of what I did over at the last church. And I'm like, oh, I really wish you guys wouldn't do that, But they did. And he says, well, you ever want to come out of retirement? And that's when kind of the bug was in my ear about coming back again with the music. Because I had endured so much feeling less than, like somebody else was better. Somebody else could write better songs. Someone else could lead better worship, this and that, and all the junk that the enemy gets you to believe, that I'd shut down for 4 years. And it took me 2 years, 2 of those 4 years to get started again. And I remember going to Baystate, and Adrian would be after me, hey, how's the guitar playing coming? Oh, good, good. I'd take my guitar like once or twice out a week because that's all I could handle. But yeah, it's good, it's good, it's good. And I go back there and sit down. Yeah, AJ's doing a great job up there, awesome, I was happy sitting back there. Until, over time, that started getting stronger. It's kind of like a toothache that you've got, and finally it gets so bad you've got to go to the dentist. So we fast forward tonight. I think it was December of 2013. Eugene and I were praying at Adrian's. And we're kind of praying about Baystate and about expanding service, or level of service. And the Lord spoke to me. He says, now's the time. And I'm like, okay. And it wasn't easy because I had to talk to AJ about coming on the team, and I was scared to do that because I'm like, whoa, who am I? I'm like, I had to step out of my comfort zone with that because I was just a guy that came to the service, and because of the social anxiety, I was just sitting in the back there and, see what the Lord had for me and just being me. But I had to go do that, and it was so different than what I expected. I'm like, cool. I get up with everybody, and, we're just playing around. Will was with us, then Will Fernandez was with us, and it was just a great time. But there was a lot of things happened sooner than I expected they would. Singing was one of them. Because a lot of the songs I hadn't known yet. Some I did. And I really wanted to get them internalized before I took any turns doing that. And then they started talking to me about singing the song here, and I really want to get internalized. Oh, Forever. Yeah, I know that one. And then here we are. And I never expected any of this would happen. So one night at Baystate, Lauren, who was one of the worship leaders here, was there. When I started coming here, I had heard her. I only had to listen to her for 2 seconds, and I knew the anointing was on her life. 2 seconds. And now, she was going to be at Baystate, and she never heard me before, and I wanted to run out the window. I mean, but I just took a deep breath and went for it. And I ended up helping out with worship here at Triumphant Life, which was, again, something that I never thought would happen, because I used to come here, and there was always a deep bench in the worship team. It seemed like they had some great musicians up here. You know, they didn't need me. Maybe if, maybe someday get in the rotation somewhere. But it was a lot of stuff that I never expected. And the Lord brought back something that I never expected he'd bring back, nor did I even really think about it that much. God was faithful to deal with trials that I had about, as someone with social anxiety does a lot of times, I had a thing about comparing myself to people and judging myself on the short end of the stick. God's been taking that away from me. It's by His grace. It's a walk. But at the 25th, and I'm going to close with this. I went way longer than what I should have, but at the 25th anniversary of this church, which I was at, the founding pastor of this church, John Whalen, had mentioned something about Triumphant Life, and what I get out of it was we don't have Triumphant Life because we have millions of dollars in the bank, because we have no problems, because we're all driving around in Rolls Royces and we got private jets and everything. Faith, what I get out of this, faith is not something that we have necessarily, but it's something that has us. And it's something that holds us together. During the times when I haven't had 2 nickels to rub together, the faith is what kept me through that. During the times when, scary times. And it is a walk, because sometimes there are situations and I'm like, Lord, who in the world ordained this? But testimonies are ongoing things. And if I could get the Oriental rug back up here. This is what I've seen in every testimony that was shared here, because what we see of each other is in the now. And all of us have had roots and things that have happened to us that make us the people that we are today. And the best part of it is the testimonies are ongoing. When you get somebody my age, the testimonies can get a little bit longer-winded because more time went by. I apologize for that. But I've really enjoyed all the testimonies in this series. That God's brought all of us a long way, and I thank God that He's not finished with us yet. I thank God that He never left us. I know I was in and out and here and there, but He was always with us. And if I could have cut anyone off, I would have cut myself off. That's how bad I was. Thankfully, God had other ideas, and still does. Amen.